Unfortunately, this was an election where the person that counts the votes was far more important than the candidate, no matter how many votes that candidate got, and we got record numbers of votes. It's a disgrace to our nation, and we are truly being scorned and disrespected all over the world. Never forget that the radical left is not the majority in this country. We are the majority, and it's not even close.
And just for those who actually would be stupid enough to believe any of that, also never forget that Rudy Giuliani himself said in federal court there was no widespread voter fraud. William Barr, the president's attorney general, called it all BS. The Trump-appointed Supreme Court justices said there was no widespread voter fraud. Federal judges appointed by Donald Trump in Pennsylvania and across America said there was no widespread voter fraud. Let's just face it. You really, really have to be dumb or purposefully ignorant to believe anything that you just saw, that president, that former president just said.
Yeah, former President Trump at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Dallas yesterday, continuing to spread the big lie that voter fraud cost him the election. And now we're getting an inside look at just how chaotic the White House was before, during, and after an election that Trump still refuses to admit that he lost. Joining us now, senior White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Michael C. Bender. He's the author of the new book entitled, Frankly, We Did Win the Election, This Election, the Inside Story of How Trump Lost.
Michael, thanks so much for being with us. So how far was Donald Trump willing to push things behind the scenes to try to overturn the will of about, 80 million plus voters?
He was willing to go as far as he needed to and do and say whatever he needed to keep himself in the White House and his hold on power. I mean, I think that's what this book really lays out here is not just the chaos. We kind of all know how chaotic this administration was and how chaotic this president was. What I was struck in the reporting of this book, and I tried to lay out pretty methodically here, is how dangerous the people closest to Trump thought he was for the country.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that have made news. In the book, you recount a blow-up between then-President Trump and his vice president. Quote, the most heated discussion Pence had ever had with Trump was in May of 2018 when news broke that Pence's super PAC was hiring Lewandowski. Trump had given Pence the silent treatment after the story came out, but when they climbed into the presidential limousine on their way to the National Peace Officers Memorial Service, Trump flung the article at his vice president. Trump thought it made him look like his team was abandoning him in the middle of the Russia probe. They wrote in silence, but after the event, on the way back to the White House, Trump criticized Pence. So disloyal, he said. Pence had had enough. He hired Lewandowski as a favor to Jared, who months earlier had asked Pence for help in finding a job for the former campaign manager, whom few in the White House trusted, as he prepared to hire Brad for the re-election bid. Pence had walked through his plans at the time over lunch with Trump. Pence picked up the article and threw it back at Trump. He leaned forward toward the president, pointed a finger a few inches from his chest. We walked through every detail of this, Pence snarled. We did this as a favor to you. And this is how you respond. You need to get your facts straight. We'll note that the former president denied this story, and he said no such fight ever happened. Talk about how you bring up this story, but you suggest this is the only time Pence ever really stood up to Donald Trump and was ill prepared for the chaos that led up to January the 6th.
Yeah, that's right. I use this story as an example of the type of thing people around Pence were urging him to do, that they needed another get the facts straight moment, that Pence needed to be very clear. The people around him needed to be very clear about what needed to happen on January 6th. Pence's people believe he was very clear in those meetings. Trump told me that Pence never told him no. And, you know, you mentioned Trump denied this story. He's singling out this book because he knows how many people I've spoken to, and people who don't normally speak to journalists. I mean, this story about Mike Pence, this is the most loyal lieutenant in the Trump administration, and an anecdote that happened several years ago that has not come out until now. And I will say that there's more where that came from inside the book.
Michael C. Bender, great to see you, my friend. Congrats on the book. I've ordered my copy already. One of the stories that has already been out there, and I was hoping you could talk to us a little more about it. One of the defining days of the Trump administration, of course, was June 1st, just over here at Lafayette Square, when he cleared the park of protesters after the George Floyd killing. We saw some eruptions of violence across the country, and you report that he told General Milley that he wanted to use the military to crack down on them, and even saying that they should shoot, the soldiers should shoot the protesters. Tell us a little more about that moment, but also what it means in terms of bigger picture, how Trump was trying to use the forces, the levers of government, and even the United States military to advantage him politically and to keep his hold on power.
Yeah, this is one of the examples in the book, several examples in the book of people talking to me because they wanted to explain how dangerous they thought Trump was behind the scenes. And just for, his advisors wanted to put National Guards on the troops to take care of to take care of protests. These are folks who are trained to handle protest. The people that Trump wanted to put on the streets are uniformed military. The difference is those people are trained to kill and take land. It would have been a very dangerous situation. And it's one of the most striking scenes to me is General Milley, the leader of the country's military, the top general in the country, in the Oval Office with dozens of aides around him, pointing to the portrait of Abraham Lincoln hanging over Trump's shoulder and says, that guy, Mr. President, had an insurrection. What we have is a protest.
Yeah, Michael, also another part of the book that's made news has been when the president was talking to his then chief of staff, General Kelly, on the way to Normandy, talking about the good things that Hitler had done. Give us some context to that headline. Yeah,
that is in a portion of the book that talks about some of the George Floyd protests. And what was striking was that the people inside the administration and around Trump, they didn't think he was a racist. They didn't think, as in the textbook definition, they thought that what was missing here was any kind of understanding of history, and not just black history, but as this anecdote shows, white history as well. He was focused mostly on his own political fortunes, and that was how he made decisions.
All right. The new book is entitled, Frankly, We Did Win This Election, the inside story of how Trump lost. Michael C. Bender, thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, just, these anecdotes, but even more so, what's happening now with Trump and with those still in office who can't seem to quit him, who can't seem to go against his undemocratic ways. This seems to be a fault line in our democracy at this point, or potentially one.
Well, I mean, as Michael was talking about, there was an ignorance with Donald Trump, and something we always said, he didn't know history, he didn't know the Constitution, and it was a willful ignorance. And now there's a willful ignorance amongst so many of his followers who all they have to do is go on Google for 15 seconds, and they can see that so many of these lies that he's spitting out there, he's blaming like the radical left. It was a lot of Republican officials, a lot of Republican election officials, a lot of Republican appointed judges that actually made those decisions. It wasn't the, quote, radical left. It was radical Trumpists who, again, are willfully ignorant right now and just don't want to know the truth because it is inconvenient to them to actually believe that their man got beaten by Joe Biden. It's something Donald Trump still can't come to terms with.